When I finally decided to let things go, I found 47 years of journals, one for every year since I was married. They were all stacked in neat, orderly piles, a silent army of my own life. They were all stored perfectly, covers facing up, in sturdy boxes I had labeled myself in my own careful handwriting. The ink was faded on the older ones, and as I stood there in the quiet of my attic, smelling the faint scent of old paper and cedar, I realized something that made the air go cold. I didn't remember saving a single one of them. I remembered buying them, writing in them. But the act of boxing them up, of deciding they were worth keeping forever, it was a complete blank, a lifetime of effort performed on autopilot. And that led to a thought that truly chilled me. If I don't remember saving them, who was I saving them for? Tell me in the comments. Do you have something you've kept for so long you can't remember why you started keeping it? Just a yes or no. I stood there for a long time, just looking at all that paper, all that weight. It wasn't just the physical weight of the boxes, it was the weight of 60 years of believing that keeping something was the same as honoring it, that accumulating things was the same as preserving a memory. For my entire adult life, I had been a master keeper. It was a skill I learned from my parents, a moral code born from scarcity. Waste not, want not, and I had perfected it. But standing there, unable to recall the intention behind my own perfect system, I saw the flaw for the first time. So in this video, I'm not going to give you a list of organizing tips. I'm not going to tell you how to fold your clothes. I'm going to tell you what 60 years of keeping everything taught me about what truly has value, and why I only learned it when I finally started to let go. The moment my entire belief system shattered didn't start with a thoughtful decision. It started with a crisis, with a desperate need. I had to find the last letter my mother ever wrote me, the one she sent just before she passed. I knew exactly where it should be. Up in the attic, inside a perfectly labeled archival box, the one with my neat handwriting that read, "Family correspondence, invaluable." I went up there with the complete confidence of a librarian who knows her own system, the old wooden steps groaning under my feet. The air was warm and still, thick with the familiar smell of cedar wood and aging paper. But when I lifted the lid, the letter wasn't there, not on top. It was just a sea of paper, hundreds of letters, cards, and notes from decades. So the search began. By the second day, my back had a dull, constant ache, and my fingers felt dusty and dry from touching so much history. The only thought that kept repeating was, "It has to be here. I saved it." On the morning of the third day, I just stopped. I sat on the floor surrounded by a museum of my own making, and the panic finally gave way to this profound, hollow sadness. The initial frustration was gone, replaced by a silence so deep it felt like an admission of failure. And in that quiet, the real truth finally arrived, cold and sharp. I couldn't find the most important letter because I had treated it with the same sterile importance as a postcard from a distant cousin in 1982. By preserving everything, I had assigned true value to nothing. I had almost lost my mother's last words, not to time, but to the sheer volume of my own clutter. I did find it, eventually, on the fourth day, tucked inside a random magazine I'd also saved for some forgotten reason, but the relief of holding it in my hands was completely swallowed by the horror of what the search had revealed. My perfect system hadn't protected my most precious memory. It had buried it. A week after the attic, I went to see my sister, Lena. She lives in one of those new glass-walled buildings where everything is white and empty, more like a hotel lobby than a home. She was telling me a story, her hands fluttering in the air in front of her like two restless birds. I noticed, as I always do, that they were completely bare. No rings, no watch, nothing. She'd spent her entire adult life getting rid of things, a direct reaction, I think, to the way we grew up. I found that old photograph of us on the porch swing, I told her, hoping to share the memory, the feeling of that specific summer afternoon. She just waved a hand dismissively. Oh, that? I think I threw all that stuff out years ago. Who has the space? She couldn't remember the splinter in my foot or the taste of the lemonade we were drinking. And watching her unadorned hands cut through the empty air in her perfect, memoryless apartment, I realized that letting go without reflection wasn't freedom. It was just another kind of emptiness. I left my sister's apartment that day feeling caught between two tides, pulled in opposite directions by two wrong answers. For 60 years, I had been the curator of a museum so full that nothing inside it felt special. Lena, in her reaction, had built a gallery with bare walls, pristine but empty of any real story. We were two sides of the same coin, both of us avoiding the real work. One of us was drowning in artifacts, the other was starving for them. And I realized the path forward wasn't about finding some perfect middle ground between keeping and discarding. It was about asking a completely different question. It wasn't about the stuff, it was about the clarity. So I went home, not with a plan to organize, but with a promise to myself. I would no longer be a keeper of things. I would become a finder of value. And that quiet decision led to a series of small, simple habits that finally taught me the difference. The very first habit began not with a garbage bag, but with a sheet of tiny, colored stickers from the corner store, the kind a school teacher might use. For 1 week, that was my only job, to walk through my own home and identify the irreplaceables. I didn't let myself throw anything away yet. I just looked. I'd pick up an object, feel its weight, and ask, is my story in this? Most of the time, the answer was no. But when it was yes, I would peel off a single green sticker and press it onto the object. The quiet sound of the adhesive touching a wooden picture frame, the back of my father's watch, or the cover of a specific book became the sound of value being declared. After 7 days, I looked around. My house was full of things, but it was dotted with only a handful of green stickers. The truth was suddenly visible. You cannot begin to let go until you know what is sacred. The next habit was born directly from the terror of searching for my mother's letter. I call it the active retrieval test. It's simple, and you can do it from your armchair. I would sit in the living room, close my eyes, and pick an item I knew I owned. A specific photograph, the warranty for the refrigerator, my grandmother's silver locket. Then I would try to mentally walk the path to it. Could I see, in my mind's eye, the exact drawer, the specific box, the correct folder it was in? If the path was clear, the object was preserved, but if my mind returned a vague fog, a sense of, it's somewhere in the basement, I knew the truth. The object wasn't preserved, it was buried. My house was full of buried things. The initial test was humbling. I failed more than I passed. But it created a new, non-negotiable rule for me. If a thing isn't accessible, it isn't truly yours. From there, I moved on to what I called the 2-sentence story test. This one was harder, more emotional. I would pick up something that didn't get a green sticker, but that I still hesitated to let go of, a vase from a forgotten trip, a souvenir plate, a piece of old jewelry. I'd hold it in my hands, and speaking out loud to the empty room, I had to tell its story in 2 sentences. The story of my mother's locket came easily, flowing out like water. But when I held a heavy glass bowl from a wedding we attended 30 years ago, I stammered. The silence was deafening. I could say who gave it to us, but I couldn't remember a single meal we served in it. I couldn't remember the feeling it gave me. And that's when I understood. If you can no longer tell an object's story, it's because its story is over. It's not a memory anymore. It's just an artifact. After I knew what was sacred, I created the small archive. This was the most practical and in some ways the most profound change. I went out and bought one single beautiful archival box. Not a cheap plastic tub from the hardware store, but a sturdy cloth-covered box with a proper lid. It was expensive, but that was the point. It was an investment in what mattered. My one rule was that all of my green sticker items, the irreplaceable things, had to fit inside this one box, not in a closet, not in a room, not in the attic, one box. The first time I gathered everything and placed it inside, the satisfying, solid click of that lid closing felt like a declaration of freedom. The lightness I felt looking at that single honored container versus the suffocating weight of the dozens it replaced was indescribable. What is the one thing you would put in your small archive first? I would genuinely love to know. But the physical habits weren't enough. I realized that my need to keep things wasn't about the things at all. It was about fear. So my next habit was the quietest one. I sat at my kitchen table with a simple notepad and a pen, and I decided to name the fears that had run my life for 60 years. My hand, wrinkled with age and spotted by the sun, wrote the words out, making the abstract real. Fear of forgetting, fear of scarcity, fear of finality. Seeing them written down in my own handwriting took away some of their power. They weren't mysterious forces anymore. They were just words on a page, problems that could be addressed. I had spent a lifetime organizing my shelves when I should have been organizing my fears. Clutter is not about the stuff. It's about what you think the stuff is protecting you from. To deal with the sheer volume of paper, the letters, recipes, and cards that had stories but were simply too numerous, I started a digital archive. This was a challenge for me. I was never comfortable with technology, and the idea felt cold at first. My son showed me how to use a simple scanner he bought for me. For an hour every morning with a cup of tea, I would sit and turn paper into light. The soft hum of the machine, the bright flash as it captured an image of my mother's handwriting, the clean, orderly look of a folder on the screen. It began to feel like a different kind of preservation. I could keep the words, the memories, the information without the physical weight and the dust. It was a compromise that felt like a victory. I learned that you must preserve the message, but you don't always have to preserve the paper it was written on. One of the hardest parts of letting go was the feeling that I was betraying the memory attached to an object, especially if it was a gift. So I developed a habit I called the memory witness. Before I would give away or donate something with a story, I would find someone to tell that story to. I called my granddaughter and described the little tin music box my husband gave me on our first anniversary, the one I was giving to her. I described the slightly tinny sound of its song, the way he'd hidden it in his coat pocket. Over the phone, I could hear her listening, taking the memory in. In that moment, the story left the object and found a new home in her. It was no longer trapped in a box in my attic. It was alive in the world. A memory only truly dies when it is left untold. To maintain this new clarity, I had to stop the flow of new things from overwhelming me again. That's when I adopted the one in, one out rule, but with my own stern modification. For every new thing that came into my home, whether it was a gift or a purchase, something of a similar size had to leave. When my sister Lena gave me a new book, I chose an old one from my shelf to donate. When I bought a new sweater, an old one went into the charity bag that same day. It was difficult at first, especially with gifts, which always felt like obligations, but it turned my home from a passive storage unit back into an active, intentional living space. Is this a rule you already use, or does the thought of it feel impossible? Just a simple, I use it or impossible in the comments would tell me so much. I also needed a way to make peace with the things I was letting go. Discarding them felt harsh, ungrateful, so I started what I call the gratitude release. As I filled a box for donation, I would hold each item for just a moment. I'd pick up a heavy woolen coat, and for a second I wouldn't see a piece of clutter. I would remember the feeling of its warmth on a bitter winter day. I would hold it, and in the quiet of my room, I would just think, thank you. Thank you for the service you provided, for the job you did. It transformed the painful act of letting go into a quiet ritual of gratitude. It wasn't about loss anymore. It was about acknowledging a thing's purpose had been fulfilled. Acknowledging that saying thank you is a beautiful way to finally say goodbye. Finally, to keep the chaos from ever creeping back in, I started the simplest habit of all, the 10-minute tidy. Every single night before I got ready for bed, I would set the timer on my kitchen stove for 10 minutes. And for those 10 minutes, I would just put things back. I'd fold the blanket on the chair, put the newspaper in the recycling, wipe the crumbs from the counter, and place my book on the nightstand. The quiet rhythmic sounds of my home being put to rest became a kind of meditation. At first, it felt like a chore, especially when I was tired. But I soon realized those 10 minutes of simple action saved me from hours of overwhelming work later. It was the physical act of maintaining the peace I had fought so hard to find. A little bit of order every single day is what keeps the great big chaos away. For 60 years, I thought my job was to build a fortress against loss. I was using boxes and labels and shelves to try and stop time from doing its job. I truly believed that if I just kept the thing, the ticket stub, the photograph, the letter, I could force the feeling to stay with it forever, safe and unchanged. But I learned that a memory isn't a fragile object you can lock away in a vault. It's a living thing. It needs air. It needs to be visited, to be spoken about, to be held in your hands without having to dig for it for 4 days. When you surround a memory with too much clutter, with too many other less important things, you don't protect it. You suffocate it. We think our job is to be the librarians of our own past, but it's not. Our real job is to know which book holds our soul and to keep it on the table where we can read it every single day. You've been listening to my story, and maybe you see a little of yourself in it. You have your own boxes, your own perfect systems tucked away. You tell yourself that you are honoring your past by keeping it all safe, that you are the careful guardian of your memories. But I need to ask you, and I want you to be honest with yourself. Are you? Or have you saved so much that you can no longer see what's truly precious? Because the day will come when you desperately need to find your mother's letter, and you won't be able to find it, not because it's gone, but because it's buried under a mountain of things you saved with the same level of unthinking care. You don't have to wait for that day to arrive. Here is my challenge to you, not tomorrow, but now, in the next 10 minutes. I want you to find one thing, the one thing in your home you truly could not bear to lose. Find it, pick it up, and put it somewhere it can be seen. Start there. Just start with one. I started this conversation standing in an attic, looking at 47 journals I didn't remember saving, and asking myself who I was saving them for. Well, those journals are gone now. I spent a month reading through every single one, and from that entire lifetime of paper I saved only 5 pages, the 5 entries that held the sound of my husband's laugh, the ache of a true goodbye, the feeling of my son's hand in mine for the first time. Those few pages now rest in my small archive, that one simple box on my living room shelf right next to my mother's letter. I see it every single day. For 60 years, I thought my job was to keep everything. I finally understand my real job is just to remember what matters and to let the rest go. Please don't wait 60 years to learn the difference between what you carry and what you preserve. Your most important memories deserve to be found. If this conversation was valuable to you, share it with someone who might need it. And if you'd like, subscribe so we can continue this quiet work together.